Yo, what's up? What's going on? Welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Sundays here on Starlight Beacon, hosted by Certified Gumbo. Got a very exciting Sunday episode today. We're going to be doing a lot of speculation and fanfic. Got my man Crim over from the Den of Nerds joining me today. He had a very interesting fanfic theory that he posted in the Den of Nerds section, Star Wars lore section this week, and I was like, yo, we got to get online and talk about this, and he agreed to join me today. So we're going to break that down, but before we even get into that, we're going to talk a little bit about Star Wars in general and speculate on some things. We'll probably talk about Bad Batch a little bit too, but yeah, my man Crim, what's going on? Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. It's really a privilege. I gotta say, I'm a bit nervous, but we had a really great behind-the-scenes discussion, and I'm looking forward to covering these topics with you.
Yeah, man. Listen, it's gonna be good. We're gonna, breeze through this. We're both very knowledgeable people about this subject of Star Wars, so we're gonna make this as casual as possible. We got a bunch of people. We'll have a few people from the Den and some certified Gumbo people tuning in tonight, so we'll feed off of their comments and interact with them as well. But before we get started, man, tell me a little bit about how you got introduced to Star Wars.
Well, it's actually a funny story. When I was just a wee lad, I was invited over to some family gathering, and they were all drinking and having a fun time with the adults. I had to have been about 5 years old, and they had the kids off in a separate room where they had the TV playing, and it was Phantom Menace. And it
Awesome.
was a big deal because it was one of the first times it was on television after the theater release. And my grandfather actually was a huge Star Wars fan. And he said, why don't you go over there and check it out? I think you would like it. And I was always kind of shy when I was younger, so I didn't want to leave his side. But he said, no, I think you'll like it. So I sat there, and my mind proceeded to be blown. And so Phantom Menace was where I got hooked.
Hey, that's an awesome, introduction to Star Wars, man. Phantom Menace is one of my favorite movies. I don't think when it came out, there was a lot of divisive opinions about the prequels and all of that. But I'm a '90s baby, and I also enjoy the prequels. I think most of us, the younger Star Wars fans, our exposure to Star Wars was through the prequels. But for me, honestly, I watched A New Hope. That was my first time watching Star Wars. My parents, they had a an original copy VHS of A New Hope, and I watched that first time it had to be early '90s, before Phantom Menace came out, and then I think it was probably the year before they released the special edition box trilogy on VHS, which I got that Christmas. And I didn't know that there was a trilogy of films. I had only seen that movie, and I'd fallen in love with it, man. The whole, Luke Skywalker walking out onto and looking out across the Dune Sea and seeing the two suns. That scene right there has always stuck out to me. And then of course you got the space battles, and like I fell in love with the space combat and the ships and the Jedi stuff, space
Yeah.
wizards and all. And that was my introduction, and that led to me, watching the original trilogy special editions countless times as a child. Then I
How
found
could
out
you not?
about yeah, and then Return of the Jedi. Me as a kid, Return of the Jedi was like, nothing was better than that. Luke Skywalker, the green lightsaber was like my thing. I was like, oh, they come in different colors, like that's sick. And I was
Yeah.
like, I had to get that lightsaber. Um, and yeah, that was my favorite movie for a long time. And as I got older, Empire became the favorite because I kind of started to understand a lot of the lessons that were being taught in by Yoda on Dagobah in Empire Strikes Back, and like now that movie is like that is my favorite movie. I don't think it's going to be hard for any Star Wars film to surpass that movie for me. Um, see what we got in the chat, man. Cashton, what's going on? Welcome, thank you for joining us today. Uh, yeah, Crim, we got some fans in here. We got some people coming in from the Dem Nerds. Star Wars
Hell yeah,
MCU is in the
brother.
house.
Star Wars MCU OG. Good friend from the den.
JBM, oh, from Certified Gumbo, my cousin, man. Good to see you,
That's your
sir.
cousin.
Thank you for yeah, man, yeah. So we all kind of started this, Certified Gumbo together. So he's a moderator. He's gonna be watching. I think he's out of town, but yeah. The prequels happened too. Saw the prequels in theaters in '99 when that came out. So that was quite an
See, you're a bit
experience.
older than me. You're a bit older than me. You got the privilege of watching Phantom Menace come out in the theater. I
Yeah,
got a
man.
chance to catch it, but it wasn't until they did the 3D version of it.
Mm-hmm. Oh wow. Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Well, I mean, that had to be an experience too.
oh yeah, that was wild. That's back when 3D was really first just hitting the theaters and people were freaking out over it, and for
Yeah.
good reason. I mean, when you see those fights and you see everything flying out of the screen at you, you don't know what's going on. But it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
certainly an experience.
Yeah, man. I mean, yeah, the prequels. There were some great moments in the prequels. The movie, Attack of the Clones. Seeing that in Revenge of the Sith in theaters was like crazy.
Yeah.
Um, I remember like the Battle of Geonosis for in Attack of the Clones. That was crazy. To see that many
Oh
Jedi on
yeah.
screen for the first time, like that, man, that was mind blowing. I remember watching the trailers for Attack of the Clones on like Cartoon Network and stuff when they would pop up, and like that was one of the things that they were promoting was like the Battle of Geonosis, and like I remember you can see, Mace Windu step out and he's got his purple lightsaber, and then like they cut to like all the Jedi igniting their lightsabers, and I'm like a kid, I'm going crazy. I'm like, oh, this is about to be crazy, and it
Yeah.
was. It didn't let me down. Love that
Yeah.
movie.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah. I'll always be a huge fan of Attack of the Clones. A lot of people put that really way low on the bottom of their list, but it's like I don't know how you can. Just the score, the overarching themes that were in that movie,
yeah, for
and then
sure.
it's just those scenes, the between the clones swooping in, um, between Django versus Obi-Wan. I mean, that was really one of the first times. It was like second or third time when you see somebody who's not a Jedi who squares up against a master and really put on a good show. Like when you think about Return of the Jedi, you think about Boba going against Luke. Luke wasn't really a master at that point.
Right, right.
He was high up there, but he wasn't a master the way that Obi-Wan was viewed as a respectable member, a master of his lightsaber fighting style. And then you have
Hmm.
Django swooping in there and just literally taking him to town. And it was just really impressive.
Yeah, and that really kind of brought the that conflict between the Mandalorians and the Jedi into the like forefront for a lot of the normal fan base, because like a
Mhm.
lot of people were reading the Jango Fett or the Boba Fett comics where he got the lightsaber and all of that, and like we saw the duels between Luke and Boba, and that was like all extended universe stuff. And a lot of people weren't like a lot of normal people weren't reading and consuming that content. Like they were just getting it was the movies, and
Yeah.
that's been the case for like a lot of people who are fans of Star Wars. Like they really their only experience is the movies, or
Mhm.
maybe sometimes is the video games. I think John Boyega he said that like his experience with Star Wars was through video games, and that's all cool because like it's all pretty much canon, and it always has been. Like that's one thing I do appreciate about the the Disney era is that this streamlined continuity, and they're focusing on making sure that everything that they put out is actually related to this main storyline. Like, and that you see and hear references to events that happen in other mediums come into like live action, and then the big one recently, Ahsoka coming over from animation into live action, and like her whole history still being retained from everything that we've seen in the Clone Wars and Rebels. All of that is reflected in that one episode that she's in, and
Mhm.
it's all rewarding for the fans who consume all of the content. Like we know that it's all a part of this one story, and it's
Yeah.
possible for all of it to come into play. So that's always cool.
I definitely have to say that it's one of the main things I appreciate about Dave Filoni and John Favreau is that they value the investment that has been put in by these artists, by these writers, and by the fans as far
Yeah,
as these other continuities. When it comes to Ahsoka, they know that Ahsoka is immensely popular, and so to preserve her story is. You would think that's common sense, but when we look at a lot of the moves that Lucasfilm Limited has made, they don't always exercise the common sense. Common sense isn't
yeah,
so common these days. But when it comes to Dave and John, they really are looking at what do fans get excited about? Because at the end of the day, that's really what movies and books. That's all they are. Is really it's fan service because it's about drumming up excitement. It's about engaging the audience to tell this story that these creatives have envisioned in their minds. Like for me, one of the biggest reveals of recent times was when in The Mandalorian, Boba Fett says, oh, it had the Jaster Muriel, and it had his father, it had conquered Dawn, and it's like, yeah, my father was a Mandalorian, and I'm just like,
yes,
yes,
yeah, that was beautiful.
yes, yes,
Yeah,
because for years I would tell everyone, Jango Fett's a Mandalorian. How do you think he's got the Mandalorian armor? Boba Fett's a Mandalorian, but he's just really not following the code. And people are like, the bah humbug. And finally, you can sit there and say, "Thank you, Dave. Thank you, John. You
yeah,
understand."
yeah. And I also like how they set it up too with the caveat of having the watch, right? And then we got Death Watch, which
Yeah,
we were introduced to in the Clone Wars animated show, and then in the Mandalorian we get introduced to the other part of the watch, which is they're just the traditionalists, like
yeah,
this is the way, like, and that gives room for someone like Jango Fett to be a part of a subgroup of Mandalorians that aren't for whatever reason considered, well, due to the conflict, of course, that we'll talk about a little bit, but like the civil war that happened on Mandalore during, well, before episode one, before Phantom Menace, which led
hmm
to the division of the Mandalorians into these two sectors, the peacekeepers that led by Satine,
pacifists. Yeah,
and then you've got the Watch, and then the militant group of the Watch, known as Death Watch, is so all of it comes into play, and like having it seems like Django is more a part of the Watch, and the
well,
more
actually,
traditionalist he
Django.
comes.
If have you read the comic Open Seasons? That kind
No,
of
I haven't.
outlines his backstory.
Mm-mm.
So it actually is one of the best comics that Dark Horse has done as far as non-Jedi stories. Um, Jango Fett actually was taken under his wing under Jaster Muriel,
Yeah. Okay.
which
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
was
Yeah.
established in canon. And Jaster Muriel was actually Mandalore
At
before
one point,
they all started fighting. Yeah, he was actually Mandalore. He was
that's
the leader
awesome.
of the planet, and But the thing is that he was driven off of his homeworld by the opposition. So it was
Mm.
actually a three-way civil war. There were three factions. There's the true Mandalorians under Jaster Muriel, where technically he was in charge. He was the authority figure, and he wanted for the Mandalorians to adopt a certain mindset, a certain psychology going forward. He thought more progressively. Then you have Death Watch, which were strict traditionalists. They wanted the Mandalorians to be a warrior culture that dominated everyone around them.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had the pacifists, which wanted complete and total reform. They wanted to abolish all the old ways of Mandalore and move in a completely different direction. They called themselves the New Mandalorians. The New Mandalorians were actually the weakest of all the factions, but because the true Mandalorians and Death Watch were fighting each other, and
Mm.
Death Watch drove the true Mandalorians off of Mandalore, and the true Mandalorians devastated Death Watch in return, then the new Mandalorians, the pacifists, they just rose up into the power vacuum that was left behind on their homeworld. So that's how they seized power, really. And
Yeah.
so while Death Watch and the true Mandalorians were fighting each other, the new Mandalorians then seized power. And then following that, Jaster Muriel and his loyalists, they were seeking shelter on another planet within the Mandalorian sector called Concord Dawn, which was Jango Fett's home planet. And they sought protection with Jango Fett's father, who offered it to them. That's when Death Watch tracked them to that farm. They killed. Long story short, they killed Jango's family, took his sister as a captive, and then Jaster kind of adopted Jango as his own. And so then Jango eventually rose through the ranks, and not to tell the whole story, he became Mandalore eventually, but at the cost of basically when he was seeking revenge on Death Watch, they had wiped out all of his men in a sort of conspiracy. He ended up getting revenge and killing Pre Vizsla's father, Tor Vizsla, who was the leader of Death Watch at the time. So actually, Death Watch predates the Clone Wars TV show. Pre Vizsla is the son of the originator of Death Watch. So that's kind of like how that lore goes. I don't want to give every single detail. But it's a really cool story. Count Dooku was a Jedi at the time that this was happening, and he's in that comic as well. I highly recommend reading it. It's pretty intense, and it actually explains why Jango Fett sarcastically tells Obi-Wan, "Always a pleasure to meet a Jedi." It's really interesting.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Because and then at conflict, I remember, and that's also they touch on that too in the Obi-Wan comic with him in Satine and all their in the Adventures of Qui-Gon and all that. But it's not the same. It's not the same story though. Like they kind of change some details, or is that all of the same? Because I know
they're not. They happened at different times. One more thing I wanted to establish: the reason why in the Clone Wars, the new Mandalorian faction under the Duchess, they say, "Oh, he's not a Mandalorian. We don't recognize his authority, or we don't recognize him as one of ours." And they basically lie, saying, "Oh, we don't know how he got that armor." It's because they basically disowned him, because the new Mandalorians wanted to have complete control over Mandalore, and they basically wanted to change the Mandalorian's identity. So anyone who didn't conform with what their vision was considered an outsider.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So in effect, actually, Jango Fett was the rightful ruler of Mandalore through the hierarchy. Then, Boba Fett as his son. But, that's kind of where that confusion came in. And you really have to take in all forms of media into account in order to really understand how that dynamic really played out.
Yeah, and now that came into play too a little bit later on when Boba Fett becomes Mandalore. Like it didn't.
Yeah, in the EU, exactly.
Yeah, in the EU, because he does become Mandalore after he climbs out of the Starlight Pit. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's a narrative that they continue in the Boba show, or at least set up, which would be cool because they've already laid the groundwork for it.
They certainly have.
Which is why, this is why I kind of wanted to get you on and kind of let's speculate a little bit about, just this whole in between period because one, your fanfic is great, is phenomenal by the way, and we'll get into that
Thank
in
you.
a bit here. But there's a lot of things that I think in this 40-year time period between Return of the Jedi. No, so 30 is it 30 years? 40 years? 30 years? I
30.
believe.
30.
Between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens, like there's so much that they are going to have to establish before they move forward at all. Like the sequel trilogy, we have to also take into account because it's canon. So, like, given what we have with that story and what Dave and John are building in this in between period, like there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of the narratives and stories from the EU to
Yeah.
reappear, but in a different with a different spin, with a different twist. Like I think that we'll probably see some play. It's possible that we could see Boba make a play for Mandalore with that series. It just really depends on what they want to do with all of that. Like they've
Yeah.
kind of changed. They've already made that change in his character and his disposition. Like he's more of a he's got well he's not it's not a change, but you see the honorable side of him, the side
Yeah.
of him that is reflective of Django, which
He's
in the
always had a
Clone
code.
Wars. Yeah, and in the Clone Wars, when we see younger Boba, like he's angry and he's not the he's not really following the footsteps of his father. Like he's kind of
Yeah.
going rogue a little bit, and it's cool to see that him in his older age is more like his father than
Kind of come back
you know.
towards that.
Yeah, it's come full circle. Like he's basically like Luke, right? Like Luke by the end of Return of the Jedi is more like Anakin Skywalker during the Clone Wars. Like you see him follow more in the footsteps of the gooder side, the better side of his father.
Yeah.
All right,
And that's something that a lot of people don't know about Django even is the fact that he did live by a code. A lot of people
yeah,
see it in black and white. Oh, he's a villain. And back in the day, Lucasfilm didn't really dissuade people of that notion. They think Boba Fett, Django Fett, they're just bad guys. Really, it's no. They follow their own code. They're more operating in that gray area. They're bounty hunters. They're under the employ of people who are tasking them with jobs, and their code dictates that they complete those jobs. So really,
yeah,
it's really about a code of honor.
yeah. I mean, job's a job. Like they are, and I like that too. They hit on some of that too with the Bounty Hunters Guild, and like that they have a sort of code of ethics and honor that
Hmm.
they even follow just to kind of sort of maintain a level of professionalism. So
Yeah,
all of that is good. And that's lore building. That's world building. That's important to the story. Like
exactly.
I was talking about that with in my review of the Bad Batch on Friday, episode 3. I know it's a slower episode for a lot of people, but for me, the world building is so important because it sets the groundwork for everything that is to come. Like
Hmm.
it's important for us to understand why someone would want to join the Imperial army. Like it's important to
Yeah,
know what the people of the galaxy feel about the Jedi and the Republic, and the Empire, and eventually the Rebel Alliance or the Partisans, really. Because my theory is that we're going to see Saw Gerrera officially establish the Partisans by the end of the season, or if not before. Like I think
I
we'll
think that's
see
realistic.
because it's like they can build and kind of sort of bridge the gap between Bad Batch and the Mandalorian, or not the Mandalorian, but Andor and probably Kenobi. Like all of these series are taking place at the same time, and we know that there's going to be crossover. And I think that we'll see some setups happen in the Bad Batch that will come into play in Andor, and then maybe
Oh,
somewhat in
for sure.
Kenobi and vice versa.
For
That
sure. For sure.
ecosystem. So, um, yeah. Now go to let me I see we got a lot of people in the comment section, so we'll go to the comment section real quick, and then if you want to we can get into the fanfic stuff.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
All right, my man Naaman, I hope I said that correctly. Welcome, thank you for joining us. Let's see.
Let's name it from the Den of Nerds.
Yeah, from the
What's up,
den.
my guy? Another nerd
Appreciate
venger.
you. We got Abby shouting out Crim.
Abby! Well, hot mic a
um.
second.
Okay, so Ashton's got a question. Coop Crim, how do you guys feel about Mando getting the dark saber? How would you rather Boba be the Mandalore? Or do you think Din Djarin? You know, I do have an opinion about that. Do you wanna
I
do
do
you
as
wanna get
well.
into this? Okay. You
Yeah,
wanna
I
you
think
wanna
that's a
start
good
it off?
question. So okay, I have a few opinions, so I won't try to. I'll try not to run too long since I want to hear your take on this as well. But I have to say that it's very interesting. It makes something that was mentioned before. I don't know if it was Theory or Josh that said it's very Game of Thrones
Yeah.
because if you think about it, because the Sweaties would know that Django was rightfully Mandalore. That means Boba technically has a claim by, birthright to the
Mm-hmm.
throne.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have uh, Bo-Katan, who also has a claim through her sister,
Yeah.
and also through being a former possessor of the dark saber and also being technically Mandalore at one point as well. And now you have Din, who has traditional rite of passage just by having possession of the Darksaber. So you've got three people already with a claim to the throne.
Yep.
Makes it very interesting.
Yeah.
Personally, I have to say, I don't see them going in the route that Boba should be Mandalore. I don't see them taking that route because, and something that Josh from the Den of Nerds mentioned prior as well is that, in theory, they were talking about how George always wanted to sort of have the Godfather within Star Wars. Yeah, actually, one of the writers of Star Wars mentioned this in a recent interview that they had with him. Um, was that they wanted to always have that crime element. They wanted to delve into that organized underworld type of thing. And I
Mm-hmm.
really think that the Book of Boba is going to go into that. I just feel like that's something that Dave would know about George and the writers before the Lucasfilm acquisition. I think that they would know that that's kind of the direction that they would want to go, and I feel like Dave would totally take Boba in that direction to make him a crime boss. I just feel like that'd be so interesting to see. While I personally would love to see Boba exercise a claim on Mandalore and to have some Mandalorian houses or clans that were more loyal to Django, um, or at least related to that faction, side with Boba and kind of like complicate things a little bit
Yeah.
and kind of build tension. I wouldn't want to see it come to all-out conflict, where Mandalorians are killing Mandalorians. That would really suck. But I think that if you build up a lot of tension there, that would be really cool. I just don't feel like that's the direction that Dave and John are going to take Boba's arc. Um, I think that seeing Din and Bo work together would be very interesting as well. My theory would be that Bo is going to see that Din has the dark saber. She's going to want to take it from him, but also she wants to unite the Mandalorian clans. So I could see them forming sort of a temporary uneasy alliance that might create
Mm-hmm.
some tension that might heat up a little bit in the bedroom. That's my theory.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement on that because I feel one, I don't think Boba has the desire to become Mandalore.
Hmm.
Not that,
Yeah.
he isn't deserving. I just don't think he has the connection, at least within the established canon. He has no real connection to Mandalore outside of his father. His father has a more, he grew up there. Like he grew up within
Yeah,
the culture.
exactly.
Boba
Hmm.
grew up on Camino, and his connection to Mandalore is through his father. And I just don't feel like, I think for me it's about who has the desire to rule. And right now, where
Yeah,
the series
exactly.
left off, Bo Katan is the only one that has a real desire to rule. However, the caveat is we have no idea how she lost the dark saber. That puts a real like uh, wedge through that for her. And
Hmm.
Din winning it outright in combat, like he has a real claim to the throne,
Yeah.
but he can't really yield it because it's not the Mandalorian way. Like so, he's
I
got
mean,
to
she
like there's
could
a
take it from him without killing him. If she bests him in combat, she doesn't have to kill him.
yeah, yeah, and
So,
so like all of that could come in. I think all of that will come to a head because you have to well, before I even get into that, like Din is a natural leader because he's a natural
Mhm.
uniter. That's what makes the dynamic interesting between him and Bo. Like people respect the Mandalorians respect Bo-Katan and her prowess as a fighter and her. I don't know how she was as um, a leader really of Mandalore, but her time with Death Watch and the troops that she was able to rally to her cause and the people that she was able to rally to retake Mandalore at the end of the Clone Wars, like we clearly know that she has a lot of respect amongst her people. However, I think that Din Djarin has shown throughout the series that he has this natural ability to unite and to bring people together. Like him taking the time out to like communicate with the Tusken Raiders is a very significant thing in my opinion because it just showcases who he is, what his character is, and like if he can do that with the Tuskens, like I could just he can really do that with the Mandalorians, and I think that he might even be a better uniter than Bo is, and I think the real question is she going to realize that and be okay with the possibility of him actually leading the Mandalorian people. It's all interesting, man. Like I don't think you can't go wrong in my opinion with either three.
Mhm.
Like that's for if you're looking at it from like a Mandalorian perspective, like the three people you have as potential rulers are all great choices. Like it's just a matter of who they want, uh, how they want that, how what Lucasfilm wants to do.
Yeah,
I think,
I think what could be very interesting about it is that just like in the EU, Boba didn't want to lead Mandalore. He kind of just got thrust into that role. He went and saved them, uh, almost accidentally. It's just like I mean, I don't want to be Mandalore. Find somebody else to do it. I mean, he said that countless times in the books. And I feel like Din doesn't want to be Mandalore either. As you
yeah,
mentioned,
he's
Bo's really
mimicked
the
that.
only one. Yeah,
Yeah,
Bo's
yeah.
really the only one that's like, give it to me, give it to me. I want it. So it's so interesting to see that dynamic. I think that Din has that almost Aragorn, unwilling leader, mentality, but I think that could have some really epic payoffs in the next season. The only thing we can do is wait and see, really.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Like that's kind of the thing. Like that's the interesting thing about season three. Like where they go with because Grogu's out of the picture as far as we can tell. We know that the Skywalker Academy thing was trademarked by Lucasfilm. That's no like nothing to like.
No coincidence, right?
Yeah, so that we know that that's something very interesting. What they could possibly do with that trademark and what that could potentially mean for I mean, that's it's clearly for Luke Skywalker and Grogu, but um, with Mandalorian season three really hinging on what seems like they're building towards the retaking Mandalore. Um, that sets up a lot of different things for the galaxy post the sequel trilogy because we don't know how long it's going to take for them to finally retake Mandalore. Because one thing we have to remember is that in the Clone Wars they mentioned that Mandalore is 1,500 systems. You know what I'm saying? Like there are
It's a lot
1,500
of territory.
worlds. So
Hmm.
and which is why they're
It's a
independent.
huge system, huge system.
Yeah. So and going back to um, the republic, like each senator, a lot of people don't realize this, but each senator represented about 1,000 worlds in that senate seat. Like there are a
It's a vast
thousand.
galaxy.
Yeah, it's like 1,064 senate seats in the senate tower, and each senator is representing like 1,000 worlds within the republic. So Senator Amidala, for example, although she hails from Naboo and she is the senator from Naboo, she's
She's
also
representing that sector.
representing every sector, like that sector
Hmm.
of that Naboo like occupies. So like, you
Hmm.
know, with Mandalore being larger than one Republic sector, technically, like
Hmm.
that's a lot. That could be a long conquest. Like
Yeah.
I'm the old Mandalorian wars from the old Republic, like that was a 16-year conflict. So you
Hmm.
can easily see like this, depending on what size this occupying force is of Mandalore, of this Imperial remnant, these warlords, or whoever's holding the world. Like, you got the Sextons are also a part of this because they are Imperial loyalists. Like, they may be the ones that are in control of Mandalore. We don't know how big that force is. So, like, we could see it's just a full on Mandalore versus Mandalore conflict, another Mandalorian civil war, perhaps, and that could be what season 3 is about. And I think in in that light, like, we're gonna see Bo-Katan, and the biggest thing for Bo and Din is to figure out if they're gonna go into this together, like how they work together, and then I think by the end of it, we'll through that through that fire of this upcoming civil war, possibly we'll see who the real leader of Mandalore is. And I think I think there'll be some friction between the two, but I think at the end of the day, Din having that connection to Mandalore through the Watch, and Bo being from Mandalore, like, I think they'll be able to put their differences aside and see the bigger picture.
What would you say if the first scene of season 3 is them getting the ship all cleaned up, they're all, like, everything's calmed down, and then Bo's like, all right, let's do this, and they just square up and fight right then and there to figure out who's it gonna be.
That would
And
be
then
surprising.
basically they can go from there with no baggage, because I don't think Dean's gonna be resentful if she takes it from him fair and square. And I don't think
Yeah,
he wants the responsibility.
I could see that, like, if they set up like an actual trial
Yeah,
for the Darksaber, and like
trial
he
by
he
combat.
gives he gives her the spear, the Beskar spear,
Hmm.
and that's what she uses. And so we get like a Mandalorian version of that fight from the last episode, where
Yeah,
between Din and Moff Gideon, but it's Din versus Bo, and like we'll see the fighting
and
prowess.
she's gonna
Because
kick his ass. I'm gonna tell you that right now because we've seen Din. He can fight normal people. He can fight crowds, like groups. He's a good fighter, but he's not technically skilled. He's a brawler. That man's a
yeah,
street fighter. He's gonna go in there, elbows, helmet, environment. That's what he's gonna use. But Bo-Katan has way more experience fighting than he does.
she's fought
She's fought
several
wars.
wars. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
yes, and
and
also
she's
too,
much more cerebral too.
and she also has a better acumen to the Mandalorian arsenal because she's
Hmm.
been she's been using the jet, like Din just got a jetpack. She's been
Hmm.
using one all her life. That's like a second pair of, that's her wings. You know what I'm saying? Like, she's that thing is as much part of her as any of her other like limbs. You know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah, exactly.
like, it wouldn't be a fair fight initially, but I think that would be an interesting thing. Um, Bo-Katan beating him, because that would show him that he still has a lot to learn about how to
Much
fight
to
the
learn.
Mandalorian
You
way, and she
still
can.
have.
And I think that's so interesting. That's a way for them to bond, because like if she bests him, he's not going to have an ego about it. I think he's
Hmm.
going to be more like, okay, clearly I
How
got
can I
some,
learn
like,
how
there's
to
a
get
skill
better?
gap here.
Hmm.
Yeah, and she would totally be open to helping him, become a better combatant, because she's going to need him to be a better combatant if they're
Oh
going to
yeah.
be able to take
Hmm.
Mandalore. So all of that is interesting. Now, the fanfic stuff. Let's get into that a little bit, because
All
one
right.
thing for sure I want to say, you brought in Thrawn, which was that's in a character named Abeloth, which I'll let you talk about. Um, but I think that there are some things, because we talked off screen, and you haven't read the newer Thrawn novels.
No,
So
I have not.
I'm going to let you go through your stuff, go through the fanfic, and then what I'll do is I'll say, all right, here's some things that are revealed in these novels that I think may inform how Thrawn could appear in this time period.
Yeah. So
All right, go.
exactly to your point, that's why I intend to read them because I have a lot more research that I have to do. As it currently sits, the fanfic is kind of like in the early stages of development. That was literally just an off the cuff set of ideas that somebody asked me, um, what would you do? And then I kind of said, well, maybe A, B, and C is how that might work, you know.
Mm.
And then I'm the kind of person where I can get carried away very easily. So as I'm typing, I'm just like, oh, and then we could do this. Oh, and then that could happen. So I'm kind of
Yeah.
just throwing everything I got into it, as we went. And then a vision really started to form. And I said to myself, I need to go back and reread all of these books because I need to be an expert on all the lore. And some of the nerd ventures were cool enough to say, hey, I want to help, because everybody's perspectives are really going to be awesome when it comes to that. But definitely, the new Thrawn canon novels are going to be number one on my to-do list.
Yeah, for sure. And like that's always the fun part of fanfic because it's like all of that stuff starts to come together and like when you're in that flow, like you just got to keep going with it. But let's do this paragraph by paragraph because I like how you got this segment because I think that's how I broke it down in the in my reply when you asked like what my thoughts were. And so yeah, so do you have this up? Do you want to read from what you've got?
Actually, it's so small on my screen. So
Okay,
unfortunately, I cannot read it. But
I got it.
if you wanted to lead the conversation, then we can kind of like touch on each point, and I'll give you my thoughts, and then you can just fire back.
Perfect. All right. So the first thing we start out with here in this fanfic is the Poe, Wedge, Antilles dynamic and them working with Rey and Finn, who in this fanfic become Jedi, and they are the ones rebuilding the new Jedi Order and the new Jedi Academy, which 110% on board with because they both deserve to be that's the duo. Like that's what we want. That was the Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi that we didn't get to see come to life
Not
on
yet,
screen.
at least.
Not yet, and the potential for it is still there. So let's talk about this relationship between Poe and Wedge because for me I think Poe gets overlooked a lot.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
that's Leia's protege. Like, so and for me I'm like, yo, he's been set up and he's been positioned as the next leader of the Republic or, the Resistance, whatever comes to be. I think that this is where I think this first section here there's enough of a story within that first paragraph that it could be its own story to kind of sort of build up to this new age threat because something that I've said multiple times is like the state of the galaxy after the sequel trilogy, all of the centralized governments have been destroyed. Back to
Not
our
necessarily, though.
Mandalore being one big like Mandalore really I would say is probably the largest if it's been if Din and Bo because we're fast forwarding here if we're gonna speculate that they successfully retake Mandalore whoever is in control of it they're both ruling whatever have you I would say that Mandalore at that point in time after the final order and the first order and the New Republic are defunct, they're the largest centralized government in the known regions. We also have the ascendancy out in the chaos that we don't really know the state of, and I'll get into that a little bit with the novels and things, but we have no idea what that could be. We got a Thrawn tease in the Mandalorian, so we know there'll maybe be players in all of this, but I'm gonna let you get into this.
Well, I did have a question for you because I haven't read any of the new canon books.
Okay.
As far as the Imperial Remnant goes, I don't think that all of them folded into the First Order. I think that there was a specific kind of section of them. But like, was the Imperial Remnant established as being completely wiped out? Because I almost feel like there would still be some outskirt worlds that willingly stay under the control of the Imperial Remnant that may or may not have, because in the EU that's how it kind of was. The Empire eventually was pushed back into certain systems that kind of formed a border, and then they kind of made a ceasefire pact with the New Republic. So I didn't know if the canon novels had touched on that at all, and if they were like, oh yeah, all the Empire's gone, they're just out in dark space now. You know.
Yeah. So yes, they did actually pull from that. Like they that's the inspiration behind like the first order. So the first order is fully established at the Battle of Jakku.
Mhm.
There's a so did you play Battlefront 2?
Yeah.
Okay, so that sets up like the whole that's the beginnings of the first order being established, and by the end of it,
Okay.
Ray Sloan, Grand Admiral Ray Sloan, and a handful of other uh, favorites of the Emperor are given coordinates, and they are the ones that go off into the unknown regions to establish the final order. Really, in the first,
Mhm.
I guess the first and final order.
Yeah. But my
Everyone
question would
else
be is what about oh yeah, go ahead. So go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. So everyone else who's left off of that, like they're left to their own devices within the galaxy, but they never
Yeah,
establish how many and how big that force is. So it's
exactly.
left
So
kind of
that's
sort of, yeah,
in the air. That's kind of
yeah,
my that was kind of what I picked up on. I just wanted to verify that.
absolutely,
So that kind of got me excited because that leaves a lot of room for Imperial forces that might rally under Thrawn, like the way they did before the Dark Empire novels and everything, where Palpatine comes back in the EU. Where Thrawn had control over a large amount of Imperial forces, and then you
yes,
have these other warlords and everything. Um, that I mean, the Empire. I don't think we really truly understand exactly how massive the Imperial fleet was. I
hmm
mean, and how many shipyards they had under their control. And while the Battle of Jakku may have been absolutely devastating for them, there's no reason why they couldn't rally under some warlords and reestablish control over certain shipyards.
yeah,
So that's
yeah,
something that I would find to be, if I was going to write a fanfic, that's something I definitely would want to establish. As a huge fan of like Paleon from the EU
hmm
and those other Imperials that really were like true believers of the Imperial cause, not just power hungry warlords. That's something I really wanted to explore because we don't see that in the canon anymore. Is like the canon's not talking about these Imperials that really wanted to have a good empire, and I
yeah,
think that's
yeah.
something I really want to explore with
I,
Thrawn being
I,
the figurehead for them.
and it would so I would say that and just a warning for everybody in the chat and comment section, we are going to be talking spoilers for a lot for almost everything. Like it's going to be difficult to have a real conversation about this fanfic and speculate if we don't spoil some things. So just FYI, you're going to hear spoilers on this stream. That being said, the Thrawn novels do set that up. Um, they position Thrawn because so just like in the original Thrawn trilogy, the people that within the Empire in the new trilogy, they
Hmm.
really value Thrawn's leadership.
Oh yeah, they love
They
that guy.
they love him because he's
Mhm.
he's a good leader. Like
Oh
he's
yeah.
like that's the type of person that you definitely want if you're going to go to war. And I've got to take commands from someone. It's definitely somebody like Thrawn because that whatever he's conscious of um, casualties, and he values the lives of all the men under his command, men and women under his command.
Mhm.
So he doesn't you know wastefully throw lives away. So that's something of value. That's something they've continued in the new Thrawn novelizations. And I will also say
Good.
that in the Ascendancy trilogy, they've also established that that comes from the Chiss. That's how they operate.
Hmm.
They do not waste lives. Like every man and woman under their command and child, because the Skywalkers are those are 10-year-old girls
Yeah, they're
that
young.
navigate space for them. Like they all are valued tremendously by the expansionary defense force.
Hmm.
So that is that's just a part of the culture of the Chiss, and he's brought that into the Empire, and that's something
Which is
that I
why
think
he's my favorite Imperial.
that's something that they'll continue with as they move into this next phase with the Ahsoka show, because
Hmm.
I think the Ahsoka show, my theory is that the Ahsoka show is going to take place in the chaos because I believe that's where Thrawn is. Because as I stated this off camera, off screen, Thrawn, the biggest difference in his character for me between the his iteration in the Heir to the Empire trilogy and the new version is that he is a Chiss loyalist. Like he is loyal to his people first and foremost. The Empire is who he believes has the best chance to help the Chiss fight off the Grisk and any and every threat that could potentially threaten the borders of the Ascendancy as well as the Empire. He even tells the Emperor as much. Like he's very like open and transparent to the Emperor when they meet for the first time. Like that's why he's here. That and that was very firmly established. And now so to your point, I think that there will be a number of people and anyone. I think when we meet Thrawn in the Ahsoka show, I think the red herring is. I think him being a villain is a red herring. He's not going to be the big bad of that show. Like it's just no way because everything that they've written in canon about his character, he's been positioned as a hero.
Oh yeah.
So I just don't see
which
that.
I'm very excited for.
Yeah. So if they're going to do that, then they would literally retcon all 6 of these new books of Thrawn's, and I'm like, that's insane. I don't know why they would do that. But,
Well, honestly, as well, when I'm looking at the fanfic, when we use Thrawn, I also want to do the same thing. I kind of want to rehash that red herring and see if people buy it and think, oh, well, maybe now Thrawn is also, because he's kind of got the way I have it set up is that he's got his own slice of the galaxy that he's in direct control over after the New Republic basically spread out, but then was struck down by the First Order. Essentially, those systems that were in proximity to that slice of space that he's kind of claimed for his organization, for the Chiss, and for himself, that area of space, like those systems that are near that, they're going to flock to him. They're going to say, well, the New Republic's gone, we don't know what to do, help us. Or maybe he's going to step in and try and fill that power vacuum. But knowing Thrawn, I don't think he's going to spread out really far. He just would probably see opportunities and take them, but he wouldn't want to stretch himself too thin. As far as I believe that his number one criticism of the Empire was that they spread themselves too thin.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's persistent too. So yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think that as far as that would go, that's the vision that I have for Thrawn, is that he's gonna kind of be the face of this organization. The people are not going to know exactly how to feel about it, and we don't really know exactly what direction they're going to take him in as far as the new shows are going to go. And I really pray that they don't kill him off. I'm going to really
I promise you,
I really hope that they
I
don't.
doubt that would happen. It's not like, or if he dies, it will be later, way later. Like, and it will be a noble end. But they've set up a lot of characters in the first new trilogy. They set up, there are 2 first officers that he has. One he actually secretly sends to the Ascendancy to like one of his best friends and his admiral, his former commander, to get to become acclimated with the Ascendancy. Like he's already sowing the seeds and laying the groundwork and foundation for him to control a certain aspect of the Imperial Remnant. To your point that you just made about him having a certain sector, I think he will, and that sector will probably be in and around Batu, because what is revealed is that Batu is actually close to the border of the Chaos, and so the faction and the Moffs of that control that sector of space, those would be the ones that he would go to try to gain control of, because one, they border and neighbor Chiss space. It makes it easy for him to get Star Destroyers in and out of the Chaos, because one thing that they highlight in the new books is that Thrawn likes, so the Chiss are kind of like the ancient Chinese dynasties that were isolationists. They had gotten to a certain point technologically where they were advanced, but because they isolated themselves, they'd fallen behind eventually over time. The Chiss have done the same thing. The what they call lesser space, the known galaxy, the main Star Wars galaxy, the Chiss call lesser space, but the technology as far as ship design and warfare has
Yeah.
far exceeded what
Exceeded
the
them.
Chiss are capable of. Like the hyperdrives technology is far more advanced. The ship size, weaponry, the shields, ray shields, all of that stuff, like all of the things that help you gain an advantage in warfare, are far better than what the Chiss have at this point in time of those three books. And going to the season 2 of The Mandalorian, when he's looking for, he's got that contract, I guess, with this shipwright.
Yeah.
I want to say
To
that
build a massive amount of ships.
he's building Star Destroyers for the Chiss
Hmm.
to fight the Grisk, because I think that's what's going to be revealed. That's my at least speculation, is that he's building
Yeah.
these warships to send into the chaos and
To reinforce their border. Yeah.
to reinforce the border. And he's done it in a way because if he's got like the sector of space that borders the chaos, then that gives credence for him to keep a certain amount of ships in reserve in the known regions to
Mhm.
help with that Imperial remnant, but also they're close enough to reinforce the ascendancy. So
Exactly.
yeah, all of that stuff is like, it's you were on the right, you're going down the right path, because like all of that's really been set up
Okay.
in canon already.
Good to know. Good to
Yeah,
know.
like, that's
I mean,
incredible
it's
because
not far off.
you haven't read the books, but
Mhm.
you're really close to actually what's going on in canon. So that's awesome.
I appreciate you enlightening me on that, because I mean it's not really me. It's just like thinking about Thrawn and his character, from the
Yeah.
EU and how he was. I mean, he's different in the canon from what I understand, but he's not that different. He still kind of has the same tactics, the same, intelligence, the same kind of thinking of consolidation, you know. And the way
Yes.
that I would have predicted for him to strategize would be along those lines. If I were in his situation, that's what I would do. I'd find a slice of space close to home. I'd try to control as much of that as I can see as reasonable. Maybe if there's some resource-rich planets that I need to stretch a little bit for, I'll do that, but nothing drastic. Just enough to have personnel, and then as you build your forces, you want to consolidate it along the home front first, and then whatever you can spare goes to the known regions. And I just kind of feel like that's what he would establish. Um, and who's gonna man those ships? Like for the most part, I don't think the Chiefs Ascendancy really has the personnel to man this continuously growing fleet of Star Destroyers that he's gonna build. Maybe they phase out some of their older ships, but you're probably going to want to maintain in service the maximum number of ships as possible if you're preparing for war. So maybe retrofitting those older ships, but also building new ones. He's going to need those Imperial personnel to man those ships. And I think that along with this characteristic of these people really liking and admiring him, they're just going to stay loyal to him, especially once the Empire falls apart. And especially once the Battle of Jakku happens and they're like, these Imperials don't give a crap about us. We're gonna die if we keep following them.
Right.
Who's gonna save
Yes.
us? And then everybody's gonna be like, Thrawn, it's Thrawn. Let's get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you just see swaths of defectors. I think that would be really cool to kind of maybe in some flashbacks or maybe in a prologue, sort of like have the perspective of a Star Destroyer captain who is sitting there at the Battle of Jakku, and like it's just going to hell, and then all of a sudden he sees like the flagship and all these main ships just jump out, boop, because they get the order to go, to go to the unknown regions from Palpatine, and he's just looking around, he's just like, oh no, and maybe you see something along those lines in the prologue sort of thing where it's starting to fall apart, and then people are kind of rallying to try and figure out where to go, and then maybe you get like a tiny time, maybe that's like a 1 or 2 pages of that, or maybe of that exposition, and then a time jump of them kind of floating out in space trying to figure out, oh, we've exhausted our resources, this, that, and the third, we need to find haven for Imperial space, whatever. but you have the New Republic just gaining on them and gaining on them and taking more and more territory, and then they get contacted by Thrawn, and then like basically that hologram conversation with Thrawn will be the end of the prologue, and then we'll go to the other side of space and we'll talk about like, and we're jumping. This is going to take place, years and years later, where Chapter 1 opens up and you've got Wedge and Poe, you know. So then
Yeah.
it's just like, oh, where's that thread going to lead us? Well, it's going to pick back up way later, you know.
So
So I
another
was thinking something along those lines.
another thing to consider with that is the Grisk, because you know the Grisk at the end of the first of this the new Thrawn trilogy. Let me pull that up here. So in Treason, this book right here, they set up
Okay.
the Grisk in that regard, and that book is actually running concurrent to the last season of Rebels. So
Okay.
when you remember in Rebels when Thrawn is away for like half of the season in the like that first half,
Yeah.
this book takes like is catalog. Like, it tells the story of what he was doing while he was away from, what's the planet called? Anyway, while he was off screen. Um,
Yeah.
the Grisk have already begun to invade the known regions of space, and it's also revealed that the ascendancy is already in the Civil War. Like when he and we don't know what the state of it is because the ascendancy books take place before the new trilogy, but
Mhm.
they've already in this by book 2 of the ascendancy they've already begun to sow the seeds of civil war within the ascendancy, and that becomes a big threat. And Thrawn at this point still has no idea who or what the main who's pulling the strings and who the Grisk are because
So basically, what that is setting up why Thrawn wasn't in the original trilogy because he was away fighting
yeah
on the home
because
front.
right so when we see him last in Rebels, like that's why I'm like, no, I'm telling everybody, not you, but like
Mhm.
he's in the chaos. Like, there's no way he's not
Yeah.
back home in the ascendancy because they reveal
Oh
in
yeah.
that book
It's
that the
logical.
Civil War's already started, and he's like, he's
Mhm.
got to get home to his people.
Mhm.
Um, and so, with the collapse of the Empire and all of that, like, we don't, that's what I don't know. I don't know how he feels about what the events, past Jedi and what the landscape and condition of the Empire are.
Yeah.
I also
What will be
too believe that
interesting? Okay, go ahead.
I yeah, real quick. I think they also too set up the fact that it's possible that the Grisk may have had a hand in helping the Empire collapse.
Mm,
It's strongly implied in the book that was because
interesting.
that's how they operate. Like they come in, they kind of get a sense of the culture and the people and what are what are the areas that the populace feels strongly about,
Mhm.
and they kind of fuel those flames and try to pit civilization against itself. So if there is dissent within the imperial rank, like I think they may be softly kind of retconning some of that so that the Grisk can actually have a hand in some of the infighting within the empire. Like, and I think that that's an interesting thing too. I think that the Grisk are a bigger threat than a lot of people realize, and I hope that they realize the potential of this because they're a very interesting adversary for Star Wars.
I definitely am anticipating seeing that storyline playing out. Uh, the thing is that I believe that will resolve itself by the time the sequel trilogy happens. It would be very interesting. I mean, at least after the sequel trilogy, I think that it should have been resolved by then.
Yeah,
I highly doubt that it would be that long of a conflict of 30 years. You know,
I
and
100% agree.
so as far as what the state of the galaxy, and this is one of the things that while initially it was horrible that they didn't expound at all on the state of galactic politics and what all the factions that exist, what all their condition is and where they lie in the galactic realm. Uh, it's also now starting to become a positive thing
Hmm.
because that gap was left in canon. Now it's going to allow John and Dave to explore that and fill that gap. And I'm
Yeah.
really looking forward to seeing what they do with it because I really trust them. I think that they're pulling a lot from the EU, and I think that it shows a lot of promise. And that's kind of where this fanfic is coming from. Is I was really trying to think about what could I see John and Dave doing, you
Hmm.
know, and then thinking about if John and Dave were put in charge of saving the sequel trilogy characters and
Yeah.
also incorporating the EU as we're starting to see them do more often, or at least we've seen that they have a penchant for doing. Um, how do I think they would go about it, and also like how would I go about it? So that's kind of like the motivation there. And thinking about Thrawn having completed, because although I haven't read all the novels, I'm familiar with the Grisk and kind of like the concept behind what's happening there. And I
Hmm.
kind of anticipate that that conflict has resolved itself, or at least been drawn into a stalemate by the time we get to post sequel trilogy. That's why
Yeah.
this fanfic is taking place post sequel trilogy, because I think that before we ever get any more post sequel trilogy content, we're more likely to get the in between Return of the Jedi to the sequel trilogy, that 30 years, that's more likely to be filled in by, John and Dave before we ever get to, addressing the sequel trilogy.
Yeah, I absolutely agree because I mean that time period, that 30 years, that's a long time, and like all
Hmm.
of we have to know what happened in this time period because
Yeah.
all of those events will inform what happens next. Like
Hmm.
you can't, just have the history of Star Wars up to Return of the Jedi, skip ahead 30 years, and then pick back up on like that's not going to work. 30
Yeah.
years is an
It's not
entire
gonna fly.
generation.
Oh
Like
yeah.
like so much
Yeah.
happens in 30 years. Like, yeah,
And then you're
so
using the same characters from the original trilogy. Like we're just gonna forget that 30 years of their life happened, and we don't know what any of that took. Like we know that he had an academy, and we know that
yeah,
Kylo Ren burned it down, and that's
yeah,
literally it. And we know that Leia played politics for a little while, got out of politics, and then formed a militant branch of a neo rebel alliance, and
right,
that's it. And
right.
that's it. It's two things. So there's so much that we can expound upon there, and
Hmm.
that's why them dropping Thrawn is like in the Mandalorian is a big deal because that's post RTJ. So Thrawn
Exactly,
is still around. Thrawn's
exactly.
doing something. Let's see it. And hopefully
Yeah,
he'll be around. Because and the thing is that because the Imperial Remnant did play a role in the Yuuzhan Vong War, because Mandalore played a role in the Yuuzhan Vong War in the EU, um, that's why to me having them is such a big deal. Having those, Thrawn basically in my mind would be the figurehead of. He'd be the force that the
end
Imperial
of
Remnant would
Empire.
rally behind.
Hmm.
Exactly. And maybe he has his own agendas, but regardless, I think that they'd be willing to follow him. So he's like kind of basically the replacing from the EU that Imperial Remnant. He's going to be the new face of that for now, and I think it'd be really nice to see the Remnant, the Imperial Remnant, not associated with the First Order, because I don't know about you, but I can't. I hate the First Order. They're just completely
Yeah,
whack in my opinion.
yeah.
So,
It's not even. It's just the way they were executed. Just makes
oh
it's
yeah.
really hard to buy
Hmm.
into. And I mean to your point as well. Gotta ask you a question. What do
Hmm.
you think, or what are your opinions about the idea of Thrawn instead of embracing or establishing the Imperial Remnant New Empire, them
Hmm.
just expanding him becoming leader of the Chiss of the Ascendancy, and then expanding the Ascendancy into that Imperial Remnant of space
Yeah,
like
of
that.
course.
Yeah,
Well,
and like
that's
that, so that
yeah.
those now that sector of space in the known region
Hmm.
or lesser space becomes a Chiss colony.
Well, that's pretty much basically what I would view it as.
Yeah.
Obviously, we would dive into the politics in the book to expound more on that, but I think that for like shorthand is why I was referring to it, because I want people to really be clear that these are ex-Imperials that are now going under Thrawn. Like
Right.
he's basically taking over that imperial infrastructure or a bureaucracy and basically refining it, basically saying, all right, all this corruption, all this infighting, all of these, grand moffs that are vying for power, there, control or delete. We're getting rid of that. And you guys are going to come and see my way of doing things, and that's how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And a part of that is going to be just, I mean, maybe he doesn't outright say, hey, guys, look, this is the chiss, because most of the galaxy doesn't know anything about it. Um, but kind of like how the British had India, and it was still India, but it was
Yeah.
just under British control. So
Yeah.
then I'm thinking, okay, Imperial Remnant, but in reality, they're just under the chiss ascendancy's control.
Yeah, I mean, and they're an authoritative government, so like
Hmm.
they totally do that, but like they're not brutalist, like
Yeah, exactly.
I mean they're authoritarian, but they're not evil, like
Hmm.
they just
Oh
kind of
yeah.
sort of, so that would make sense, like that they would sort of, and they have the same sort of um well, not negative, but they're
Structure
distant
almost.
about aliens and alien
Hmm.
contact only because of how their society is structured. And I will say that the reverence that the people, because there are, I don't know how many thousands of civilizations within the chaos, they haven't
Hmm.
established how big the chaos actually is, but we know that through the ascendancy books that it's pretty sizable part of the
Yeah.
galaxy, and that the aliens or the other species that occupy the chaos view the ascendancy in the same light that many people in the known galaxy view like the Jedi Order. Like they're like this
Mm,
mythical, like
interesting.
super species of like into like, because like I said, like all of them exhibit that Thrawn level intellect, and the way they like, that's just a part of the Chiss culture. Like
Mm,
how he operates is just part of Chiss culture. He's just exceptional at it. Like he's even, he's above them in many regards, but he's not the only person of that level intellect within at least the expansionary defense force, because all of
yeah.
the other commanders and all of the people that he reports to also recognize his brilliance and his genius, and see you know how the politics of the ascendancy are really going to impede his progress. you know
Mm,
but I think that with we'll see how I'm very interested to see read his last book in the Ascendancy trilogy, because that comes out in November, which is
hmm.
before Ahsoka show comes out. And in my like, there's no way John and Dave have not taken into account these 6 books, because
Yeah.
that book is done. So they have that to pull reference from.
Hmm.
They've had time to consult with Zahn on the character of Thrawn, because there's no way he's not going to be in the Ahsoka show. Like that's literally what the show's got to be about. Like them and Ezra Bridger too. Like
Hmm.
what is his role? Because I think for me, Ezra's going to be the one that convinces Ahsoka and whoever else, probably Sabine, or definitely Sabine, but and whoever else she brings along in the show, he's going
Hmm.
to be the one that convinces them that Thrawn is not a bad guy. Like he's not the evil here. Like
Yeah, he's
because
not the emperor.
he's going to have time. Like if you think about it like that, the Rebels ends like right before Rogue One, or right
Hmm.
after. Is it right before or right after Rogue One? So either
In that
way,
area. Yeah.
he's been with Thrawn for what the original trilogy is, what, 5 years, and then
Yeah.
the Mandalorian is
Isn't the
like
man?
six
Yeah.
six
So
years
it's like
after
10
Return of the Jedi.
years.
So yeah, it's
Yeah.
about 10, 11 years, almost 12 years
Hmm.
probably by the time we see Ezra, and he's been with Thrawn this entire time. There's no way he has. If he's still with Thrawn, there's no way he has any level of animosity towards him at this point in
Yeah.
time.
It probably didn't take him long to figure out exactly what. I mean, when they jumped to hyperspace, Thrawn probably sat him down and was like, "All right, kid, listen.
Yeah,
This is how it's gonna be. This is what's going on, and this is what I'm trying to do." And then Ezra's probably like, because at the beginning of the show, Ezra's really impossible. But I think that from what I've read and what I've heard, like by the end of the show, it's like, okay, he's more considerative, he's more intelligent, he's more of better, more developed character. So by that point, he might be able to just say, "Hey, I get it." you know.
He's
And
more like Kanan.
yeah, I don't think it'll take much. I think he's more going to be like, all right, well, I mean, I'll take your word for it, but I'm not going to fully trust you until I see, you know.
Yeah,
Uh, but I don't think it's going to take long for Thrawn to like be like, look at it,
no,
think,
yeah.
Ezra.
Well, I mean, the Grisk. I'm telling, like, to your point, Ezra's smart. Like, he's very. By the end of the season 4, he's very mature. Um,
Mhm.
and it's not going to take him long to realize the threat that the Grisk pose on the galaxy, because
Yeah.
the more exposure he gets to the ascend, like, one thing that's going to open his eyes is him going into the ascendancy and seeing how the ascendancy operates, because he
Mhm.
doesn't know anything about the ascendancy. He's going to get into the ascendancy and see how, how, one, they are very different. Although they are an authoritative government, they are very different from the empire in a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of respects.
Mhm.
And Thrawn taking, basically throwing him into the fire, um, with whatever battles they're going to have with the Grisk out there, is going to get him to see the light and the reality that the Grisk face, because the more exposure he has to the ascendancy in their society, and the realization that something or some entity could come in and and create a divide within this culture, within this society, is a bigger threat than the empire ever was in the known regions. And I just feel like it's going to be interesting to see both of those characters again, and where they stand and all that.
So here's my question. I just have one question about the Grisk. As far as their intelligence level, would where would you classify them?
So I don't know about the entirety of the Grisk, but I would definitely
Yeah.
say their leader is he's the Moriarty to Thrawn's Sherlock.
Okay.
Like, if
So then do you see it being possible that perhaps the Ascendancy are not able to defeat the Grisk, but to fight them into a stalemate?
yes, yeah,
So
I
that's
think
kind of what I would probably put it um in the post sequel trilogy thing. I think that perhaps while the sequel trilogy is happening, Thrawn is like trying to consolidate his forces to build up for another push against the Grisk, basically. So at that point he'd be working on um just kind of building his forces up. I think it
yeah.
would be
Well,
really interesting. Okay, go ahead.
yeah, and to add to that, like, it's
Mhm.
the Grisk. He's fighting a war on two fronts.
Mhm.
Like, he's already, like I said, like, at the end of the treason book, he's already, and has been for some time, sending his agents into the known galaxy, into imperial space. So what he did to the Chiss, he's already started doing to the empire. And at that
Mhm.
point in time in that book, the ascendancy is already in the midst of a civil war amongst the nine ruling families. So,
Yeah.
like, if they, and with that happening, and the you're talking about a society that has been, um like, this, the ascendancy is what the empire wanted to be, and they had been
And
that
they've
for
been that
thousands
for
of years.
for the
Like,
longest time.
right. So the fact that any outside force could come in, figure out what and how to cause division within the ranks of these very united people, and get them to go to civil war, which hadn't happened in, like, thousands of years, is like, that's incredible. That's quite a feat. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, like, it's going to take some time to reverse the damage, and I think that 12 years it'll probably take them 12 years to stop the bleeding within the ascendancy.
Yeah,
So he's probably
definitely.
still occupied with that by the time we see him in at the end. When Ahsoka goes to search for him.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that it's going to be really important to kind of figure out a way to skirt around it when writing the fan fiction. Because while we're not touching on the Mandalorian time period and the post original trilogy time period with the fanfic, aside from maybe like a few references and flashbacks from stuff that we already know has happened, it'll be really difficult to to predict what's going to happen. So I think that the key for working through this fanfic would be to skirt around that and allow Dave, like, just allow room for like Dave and John to do their thing without whatever they do canceling out the possibility of this fanfiction actually being something that you can take to the bank later on and say,
Yeah.
hey, because the way that I would envision this, like the most ideal top fanboy dreaming sort of situation would be writing this as a fleshed out trilogy of fan fiction books, and then actually having it properly edited, gone through, compiled, and then maybe translating it into a screenplay, and having not only just a trilogy of novels and then a screenplay, and then trying to get somebody in a position at Lucasfilm to be able to look at it and say, hey, what do you think of this? And that's kind of like a tall order, considering that they have a lot of plans probably already in motion. But it never hurts. It never hurts to be able to say, let's try to throw that out there. At the very least, we'll have an organized fan fiction completed that actually offers quality content to read. I mean, I'm pretty confident that the way it's written, the service it's going to do to the characters, the level of detail, exposition, the look at galactic politics, at the very least, it'll be an interesting alternative reality for people to explore.
Well, the good thing about Lucasfilm is that they've always had and valued fanfic and things that the fans create within this universe. Like they've always, well, at least George did. Like he always valued the creatives within the fandom that would go out and create their own story. Star Wars Celebration used to have like a fanfic award section. Like
Really?
yeah, like they used to award people who had like if
It's really cool.
people, so like people used to make like a bunch of fanfic videos and put them on YouTube, and then the ones that blew up would get the attention of Lucasfilm, and they show it to George Lucas, and like he'd yay or nay, and then they would shout them out, they would show the videos at the at Celebration. Like that was the thing. So yeah, like this is, and if they, I hope they continue, and I hope with Dave having more say and John having more say, they continue that tradition, because it's always been a part of Lucasfilm. I mean, they look at what they do with the 501st, and with the
and using
droid
them in the
makers.
Mandalorian.
Yeah, like they have a very strong connection to the fan base, like, and they always have. And as long as they continue to cultivate and you know value that relationship, that always will be an opportunity for things like this to actually, in some way, shape, or form, impact canon.
Yeah, and I mean, if at worst case, if it does get rejected, the best thing that we can do is make it, into a full conversion, and just convert the story and characters into something that is not Star Wars related, and then publish it as separately.
Right.
I mean, something that I thought was really cool was that interview that they did on Rule of Two with Theory and Mark Hernandez, and seeing them interview Michael A. Stackpole, who was one of my favorite EU writers, and just listening to him talk about working with Timothy Zahn and how Lucasfilm, or not Lucasfilm, maybe it was whoever was in charge of the publishing and the canon, how they actually went to Timothy Zahn and him and Michael A. Stackpole to kind of help them flesh out their canon, help them correct some mistakes that were in canon, and ask them to take creative liberties. And that's like, to me, hearing that and just that whole interview, I got really emotional listening to it, because as a child or as a young adult reading these books and these novels, they really inspired me to open my mind and to be more creative. And then just to know that the writers had the same experience. They had their minds blown by Star Wars when they were younger, and then they got to work on these projects with these opportunities that they seized, and then they gave them the chance to have fun with it, and to create this world that, as a young adult, I had fun with. I imagined and saw play out before. So for me, there was like almost a parallel, and to know that that was how they experienced Star Wars was from the creative aspect. It's just really made me want even more to pursue that, to create. I've always been a writer or an amateur writer, but to hear from their perspective and their experiences how they were able to work on it, I don't know. It's like always been a dream of mine to be able to create something that other people can read and be inspired by as well, the way I was.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I mean, I've also done some like fanfic writing within the universe because of this. Like the the fact that it's a possibility that if it's good enough and enough people like it, the possibility is there for them to even acknowledge it, read it, and you know even reach out to you as the creator to come in and work on projects with them. Like that's very inspirational, and that just shows that it's worth the investment in this franchise.
Yeah. And they might not like the story, but if they read my books, I can pretty much guarantee they're gonna enjoy the writing. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, they don't have to like the
Absolutely.
story, but if they like the writing, maybe they'll ask me to do something, or maybe they'll, if we do it as a team, of writers, then they might say, hey, can you guys work on this and then whatever. That would be amazing.
Yeah,
That would
yeah. They
be
might say,
pretty
"Hey, look,
much.
we got this. We're we've been kind of working on this Old Republic stuff for a little bit. Uh,
Oh man,
would you
that would
mind
be
coming
wild.
in and writing some stuff with this?
Mm.
Like, here's some basic parameters." Or they might just be like, "Hey, man, go to town, and we'll kind of sort of cut it back into place." Or they might say, "Look, man, we really are at a point where we don't even know what the next movie." The next trilogy is going to be because they haven't announced the next trilogy so
Yeah,
that's
I think
clearly
that's something
something that
with
they're still
Taika,
developing.
or yeah, I mean, I really would love to see a trilogy done by Taika. I think
Yeah.
that his movie probably, if it's good enough, or if it's like if it does well enough, it might spark a new trilogy. I also think that with Kevin Feige, they're saying, oh, they're just giving him one movie. I'm like, this is Kevin Feige. He's gonna
Yeah.
make this movie in a way that you're gonna want more. I could just see him getting his own Star Wars trilogy, and maybe, the news coming out is that he doesn't want anything really big to do with Star Wars. But I guarantee you, if they, if he has a chance to get a trilogy, he's going to
Hmm.
take that. I mean,
I mean,
Kevin Feige loves Star Wars, so
yeah, he's a huge Star Wars fan, and I think that he's also, you know, I don't think it would. I mean, to me, it makes sense that if even if he doesn't make a trilogy of movies, if he's just there as an advisor to help them, build a cinematic universe because he's built an excellent cinematic universe over at Marvel, and
yeah, he does.
like there are a lot of ways, and things that they can probably learn from him about, you know, constructing this narrative arc over, you know,
Hmm.
multiple movies that, you know, they could really benefit from. I think even that would be beneficial. And I think the big thing for me is take they need to take their time to figure out what these next movies are going to be because at the end of the day, like we love everything. Like my thing is I've I think outside of what Solo and in the sequel trilogy, everything else for me has been great. I mean, Fallen Order was one of the best. That's some of the best Star Wars content we've gotten in a long time, and the fact that that's canon is amazing too. Like they've got the stories are there. Like there
Yeah,
have been great stories, and you know, Rebels season 7 of The Mandalorian, The Bad Batch, in these 3 episodes, The Mandalorian, like all of this stuff has been really great content, but we've got to get this theatrical experience
yeah.
back in back on track. Like um, we
I
just
think this.
that's kind of sort of where I am at as a fan. Like
Yeah,
I'm not a half empty, half full. Like I'm just like, yo, here's the reality of the situation. Like, how are we gonna move forward from it? You know?
yeah. I think that John's experience working with Kevin Feige was really John Favreau is probably
Definitely,
really invaluable, and
definitely.
that's why we see them approving such a huge slate of projects for Disney Plus is because they've created The Mandalorian, they've got all these threads, um, they really they really have an opportunity to be expansive with the way that they take the universe.
Mhm.
Um, but one of the major things that, as to your point, is concerning is that what's going to happen with cinematics. We have this Patty Jenkins movie coming out, and it really concerns me because I was a huge fan of the EU books, the X-Wing books, and
Yeah.
so for her to be doing Rogue Squadron, that's a big question mark for me. Like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hope she does
Because
it justice. Because Wedge Antilles was one of my favorite EU characters.
Wedge
Um,
Antilles is so underrated as a character. Like
Thank you. He really
he's
is.
man, what he was there at for every moment in every space
Yeah.
battle and at every key moment for the. I mean, he was there to destroy both Death Stars. You know what I'm saying? And he
Yep.
played a key
Yep.
role in that. And like,
And
yeah,
I
he's a very
loved
important character for me.
and I loved the service that they did for him in expanding him in the books. I really
Yeah.
think that the way that Stagpole and Alston um and everybody that touched his character, they did a really good job with him. And one of the things that I really liked to hear in these interviews on the Rule of Two is how much the authors, they interacted with each other, talking to each other. And Michael A. Stackpole said that even though the other authors didn't have to, they would
Mhm.
call him up whenever they were messing with the characters and say, "Oh, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. How would this work?" Or, "Hey, how does this sound for this character?" And they kind of get each other's input, and that's really what made those stories in the EU so unified. They felt so fluid because they were really all tied together so well. And that's why with my fanfic, it's so important to me to include Wedge Antilles. And to me, it was so meaningful to see characters like Lando and Wedge in Rise of Skywalker. And was I extremely disappointed to the umpteenth degree with how little of a role they played? Yes. Yes, I was. However, seeing them there as a reaffirmation that they're still alive was really nice. And
Yeah.
therefore, I felt that I would be remiss if I did not include Wedge in the storyline for the sequel trilogy. I think that Poe would have met Wedge after that battle, because I don't think that Wedge was really a part of the Resistance. He was still flying his original X-wing.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that he was probably out minding his own business on some backwater world when somebody reached out to him and was like, "Hey, Exegol," and he was just like, "Time to dust off the jumpsuit," and
That's actually
I
not
just,
too far off of what happened. Like
oh, was that in the
he's
books?
yeah, it is. It's in the
Okay.
aftermath books. It's
Oh,
explored
okay.
a little bit,
Got you.
and like I think the last battle he's in is in the Battle of Jakku, and at that
Okay.
point he's like a significant figure within the rebellion. Like he's like one of the
Mm.
head honchos.
Mm-hmm.
But afterwards, like wartime is over. He's ready to be done with it because he's been involved.
Yeah.
He's been with the Alliance since the early
Since day
stages.
one, pretty much.
Maybe
Yeah.
we'll see Wedge in Andor. That would be fire if we can see a young
That'll
Wedge
be
in
really cool.
Andor. Like, oh man,
But
I
he
would.
would he would have to be young though. They
Oh
have to
wait, no,
really
he wouldn't
de-age
be.
him.
Yeah, never mind. He wouldn't be able to do that because he's actually in the Imperial Academy. Remember, because we see him
Yep.
in Rebels, and he's a part of.
Yep.
I forgot about that. So yeah, never mind. You
Mm-hmm.
couldn't. We wouldn't be able to see him. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, definitely more Wedge. But yeah, so and
But yeah, I think it'd be
Snap.
really cool. Hmm?
You remember Snap Wexley? And
Yes.
that's
Yeah,
his
dude, of course.
stepson, technically,
Um, yeah, yeah,
because he
yeah.
marries his mother. Because they're in like, and they're yes, they are on a backwater. They're retired on a backwater world.
Mm-hmm.
They're basically farmers, and his X-wing is
Mm-hmm.
on the lot,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
And I think the Black Squadron shows up. Poe Dameron Squadron shows up
Mm-hmm.
and asks for them like to come in because like they tell them that Leia has passed. Oh no, Leia's put out the call because
Okay.
because it's like right after Last Jedi. So
Mm-hmm.
they tell him Leia's looking for allies and like because it's Leia asking, they're like, okay, yeah, maybe we should. And I think some people from the First Order show up and then they have to escape or something. It's interesting,
Yeah,
but like no, they could have been on screen a lot more. In
yeah.
Rise, I agree. I agree.
Well, they just don't understand what these characters mean, so we can't really hold it against them. What am I talking
Yeah.
about? Of course we can.
look, we have to hold them
But
accountable. We
yeah,
can that's just as part of this fandom. Like, yeah, we put in the time and effort to
yeah.
read all this stuff. Like,
Have
yeah,
you ever
we
seen A
should have an
Knight's Tale?
opinion. Yes.
I want this fan fiction to look at Disney and be like Paul Bettany's character when he said, "I will eviscerate you in fiction." So that's what this fan fiction needs to do. Not like directly, but it's gonna basically say, "Hey, look at what you could have done with these awesome characters." Pta.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, definitely Wedge Antilles is gonna play a big role. Especially early on. I think that it would be cool to have that little dynamic where you maybe have a flashback or maybe a reference to Poe um, twisting Wedge's arm to say like, "Hey man, like we really need you. We
Yeah.
need you now more than ever." So, kind of seeing how Poe, even though he still has a lot to learn, as about being a leader and everything, now maybe instead of him this because Leia's gone, I think seeing Poe being taken under Wedge's wing would be really nice as well.
And
I
it makes
also want to.
sense too because, like, they both have a tremendous amount of respect for Leia, and
Yeah.
Wedge has a relationship with Leia. Like, they go back. Like, he knows Leia. Like, he
Oh yeah.
knows young Leia. Like, so he
Hmm.
knows what Leia was like when she was Poe's age, right? So it makes sense that he can be that type of mentor figure for him
Yeah.
as Poe steps into this more leadership role.
I think it would be
But
really beautiful to have them like talk at Leia's funeral, like to have like an actual
an actual
memorial
funeral, yeah,
service. Yeah, and I would love to put that like in the novel. That would be really,
that would be
that would
sick.
be really powerful. Yeah, because Leia is such a beautiful character, and she really, oh man, I'm gonna make myself emotional. She really deserved a better send off than what she got in those movies. So
I
I think that
agree.
to put it in the book would be really like a privilege to be able to like that would have to be a sequence where it doesn't have to be super long, but just the level of detail and the honor that we can show that character would be really important. And I think
Abs-
that to have two great characters like Poe and Wedge interact at such a setting would be really nice. I also would like to reintroduce like people like Hobie Clivian and
mhm.
Tycho Kelchu. Those are great characters. Wes Jansen, I believe oh no, it was Hobie. I think it was
Hobby,
Hobie that they said they killed off
yeah,
officially
Hobby dies in
on
Empire,
Hoth. Yeah,
yeah, and
but
Wes is kind of sort of his fate is undecided. I think
yeah,
because
so
he
I
crashes,
think
but I don't think he dies in the crash.
yeah, it would be nice to bring Wes back, but I know that they said that Hobie died in canon. I don't know why they said that because in the books they kind of like wrote a way for him to have survived. So I kind of felt like they were just like, oh no, he's dead, just kind of like further
I,
spitting on the EU. But
well, didn't he? I thought he didn't. Didn't the
no, it
didn't
was
that snow
I'm
speeder got
messing it up.
crushed?
I'm
Yeah,
messing.
West
Well,
for sure.
yeah, Wes was the one that died for sure, right? Because I think
No,
Wes was
Hobby,
no, it
because
was
Hobby's
Hobby.
yeah,
That's
because
right. Hobby
Hobby's
was
in
the
the
one
back.
riding with
He's on the
Luke.
harpoon. Yeah, he's on the harpoon.
Yeah,
He's got Luke's harpoon.
that's
Wes
right.
Jansen gets shot down because he's Rogue
Mm.
Two, right?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah, he gets shot down, but his fate is undecided because we,
yeah,
at least in the film, it can actually be interpreted that he could have survived that crash,
hmm
and
yeah,
escaped. So, I
yeah.
don't,
So I
I
would bring.
can't confirm whether or not they've
Mm,
actually killed that character in the new canon. I'll
yeah,
have to look into that.
I know for sure it was Hobby. Yeah, Hobby was the one that was dead, which is kind of sad. But I think that what I would do is I would find a way to have a character that is similar to the way that he was in the EU, because I mean, the way that they had that team in the EU in the X-Wing books, like their dynamic was so
Sick.
good,
Yeah.
it was so fun and like the diversity. It was like a Bad Batch light almost.
Hmm.
If you think about their dynamic, you know. Um, so I think that would be really nice to kind of like have a dynamic like that in the fanfic as well. I mean, I just want to pay a service to all the different things that we see in the EU that were good. The
Yeah.
good things from the EU that really brought such a fun element to it all.
Mhm.
Like the sequel trilogy just doesn't have that for me. Like when I watched them, yeah, at times there are fun parts, there's great visuals, and the characters are solid, but the writing is just so poor that even the humor is at points it just doesn't hit. And the
Agreed.
dynamics between the characters, it doesn't hit. And a lot of the things that the characters say and do don't make sense. And it's like you have these characters that have such great potential, and you just fail to capitalize on them. So, in a major part of this fanfic, like the goal behind it would be to unite the fans. The
Hmm.
fans of the sequel trilogy, like they have a good reason to be fans of the sequel trilogy. I personally am not. Um, but that doesn't mean that we can't find a way to come together again. There's no
Oh
reason
yeah,
why
absolutely.
there should be animosity between us. So I think that to say, for people that felt really disrespected by Disney's treatment of, or LFL's treatment of the EU, people that feel slighted by that, I think that to reintroduce the sequel trilogy's characters and storylines in a way that really jives with the EU and makes sense, and then bringing back like characters that really made up the backbone of those stories and blending those storylines, because it's not hard to do. Those are great stories in the EU. So to bring them together and to weave them into the DNA of Star Wars along with the sequel trilogy, I think it's not hard. It just takes a little creativity and the desire to do so. So
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I feel the same way about the sequel trilogy. It's not my favorite, but I also have to think about, like, I think about me as a kid, right? And
mhm.
like I remember like how much people hated the prequels, and
Yeah,
like I enjoyed the prequels, and so I'm like, I'm not going to disrespect anyone who likes them. Like
hmm
that's not my issue.
it's not
Like
a
it's
place to do that.
yeah, like my if you enjoy them, then you enjoy them, and I'm happy that you enjoyed them. Um, my only issue, my biggest issue, is that there was a they took for granted the investment the fans had in the EU
And the
and
creators that created the EU too.
the creators as well, and like they took for granted the fact that although we've only had at that point, there were only 6 films. We had 40 plus years of continuous
Yeah,
content coming from Star Wars and from this universe. We had
yeah,
established rules and we had lore. There were things, expectations, and how all this stuff happens. And it was just a blatant disregard
yeah,
for a lot of that.
yeah.
And it just didn't land because. And I can see how if this is your first experience with Star Wars, I can totally see how you would enjoy these movies.
Oh yeah,
But
for
for a lot
sure.
of people, for a lot of us who we've experienced Star Wars for so long, it just did not fall into what our expectations were for the
Yeah.
franchise and how all of this shapes together.
hmm
An
Yeah.
example, on the contrary, is The Mandalorian. Like, The Mandalorian is a different story, but it does fit within what we understand about Star Wars and the universe and how
Yeah.
things work. So, and that's the biggest disconnect for me with the sequel trilogy. It just there's too many moments where it does not fit into what we understand this franchise and how this universe
Yeah.
works. And
Yeah.
that's my biggest issue. Like I said,
Yeah.
I think I said this off screen. Like I don't have an issue with any of the characters. Um,
hmm
I think all the characters they introduced are great, and I want to see them again. I want to see more of Ray and Finn and Poe and
I want them to be
uh,
redeemed. I
yeah,
don't
like
want
they
I don't want
deserve
them to just
better
be cast
stories than what
aside.
they got. Yeah, they
Exactly.
totally
Yeah.
deserve better stories
Completely.
than what we saw in the sequel trilogy. Like that's
And
what I
if you
want.
like those stories from the sequel trilogy, wouldn't you want them to have even better stories? So, like for
Right.
us, we think the stories are subpar, but we still want to see them have good stories.
Yeah.
But for those people that think that those stories are great, well, then wouldn't you be even happier if you had even better stories than that?
There's
So
always
it's like
room for improvement.
exactly. Um, I think
Hey,
that the biggest. Go ahead.
I'm gonna say we gotta. So we're like an hour and 45 minutes into the broadcast. I usually do these for an hour on
Okay, I
Sunday, so I
got
think
you.
we're going to we're gonna have to call it here soon. But I would definitely love to have you back on next Sunday
Yeah,
if you're available, and we
for
can
sure.
continue
We didn't
this.
really. Yeah, we didn't really
Yeah,
touch on the
we got a
fanfic
lot more.
itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so because there's a lot more we got to discuss with this, and I think a lot of people would
Yeah.
look forward to continue this conversation because I mean we've had a pretty good audience today on the show. Thank you for everybody in the den who's come in
Mhm.
and sat with us, and the certified gumbo audience and everybody and new people watching. Appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Crim, is there anything you want to shout out, promote any social media or anything like that?
Currently I haven't gotten everything in order for my YouTube channel. It's just a bunch of copyright bait when it comes to just some game clips and stuff that I've uploaded over the years. Um, but as far as shout outs, we got great content with the Den of Nerds. I really want to shout out the Discord because you're a great contributor there to the community. I always love the discussions and seeing you interact. I mean, even if I don't participate, I'm reading and I'm just like, Coop, keeping it real, man. So, the Den of Nerds is a great place. It's a great community, and your channel is great. So, I think that just shouting that out and saying, Nerdvengers assemble.
Yeah, Nerve
I
Avengers
think,
for life, man.
yeah, man. I
Definitely.
think that
But
that
yeah,
that'll do it for me.
yeah, man. Appreciate that. It's a big. I'm such a huge fan of the franchise, and like the Den has always been a place
Mhm.
where like it's such cool people there, like you and just
Oh
so
yeah.
many other people in the Den and in that community that are just level-headed people to have conversations with about Star Wars, and so I always appreciated that as well. I also have a Discord for Certified Gumbo, and I'll drop a link to that in the chat
Yeah. Hit me
because
up
we
with that
actually
too.
yeah, we
Really
do
join that.
more than Star Wars. We have a regular show that we do every Saturday where we talk about like anything nerdy, any nerdy topics within entertainment. We do some reviews and just kick back, have casual conversation. So
Nice.
definitely would appreciate you guys tuning in for that at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Saturday. We got 41 episodes. We moved the Saturday stream. We were supposed to have Saturday stream yesterday. We didn't do that. We are moving that actually to tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to be talking about Jupiter's legacy and then some other. I forget what the other topics are off top, but we'll be talking about that because we've had a chance to watch that now, and we're actively ranking the Marvel movies. So we've already ranked the MCU films. And this is all it's subjective ranking is how we feel about the
Mhm.
film. So um, we're going through the MCU movies, we're going through the Fox movies, and the next thing is Sony. And we'll probably do that next Saturday. But if you want to get an idea of what the show is about, it's called Cookout. It's on this channel. We'll be doing that tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So make sure everybody tune into that. We definitely love to see you again. I just dropped the link to our Discord. You know, the crossover. I've had a number of people come over from the Den as well as like Everyday Geeks. They've been a huge supporter of us too, so shout out to them. Um, but yeah, man, like all of these, I just love that the communities of the Den of Nerds and all of the other communities that I'm a part of, are so cool and level headed. And it's good to be able to continue, cultivate that within these fandoms. So
Have you had Josh
that's
come over to a stream yet?
he's not come on to a stream, but he has watched my Explore the Lore videos, and so
Okay.
that was cool. I'm working
I'm a
with
super chatting man. He's
at
gonna
some
come
point
on
I'm
here. He's
gonna
got
get
to.
that would be awesome. At some point I'm gonna get on with Star Wars Santa. We've been trying to work that out for a little while too.
All
So
right.
yeah, so that's a thing to look forward to. I actually had a conversation with him this past Friday or Saturday.
Solid dude. Solid dude. That'll be
Yeah,
cool.
man. Yeah, he's great personalities. Great dude. But yeah, man, that's all I got to say on this stream. So yeah, man. Hey, thank you all for tuning in. It's been a blast. Make sure you come back next Sunday. We'll continue this conversation. I will also be doing an episode 4 review of The Bad Batch on Friday night. 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on the channel, so make sure you tune in to that as well. I just basically kind of give my recap of the episode and then speculate as to what could happen with the characters. So, if you want to have that conversation, join me for that on Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be here streaming. And as I always say, peace, love, blessings, and may the force be with you always.
Smash the like button and get an extra scoop.